If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Simple rules for a complex world. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. God gave Moses only 10 rules. That's a great example of using simple rules for a complex world. That title of today's podcast comes from a 1998 book I used in a class many years ago. I keep thinking about it as the regulatory environment gets more restrictive in the United States. The book by Richard Epstein points out that simple rules are better. The original Social Security Act of 1935 was only 32 pages. In comparison, the Affordable Care Act of 2010, known as Obamacare, ran just over 900 pages with an estimated 20,000 pages of explanatory notes. The IRS code is just over 2,500 pages, and the supporting rules runs to over 9,000 pages. When you call the IRS, they give you the wrong advice 20% of the time. That's because this complex set of rules favors the legislators who make the rules. They're able to hand out tax deductions to groups they like, who help them get elected. Another example, the National Football League is a good example of having too many rules. Most broadcasts now have a fourth announcer who is a rules specialist. That's an indication there are too many rules. But back to the book by Epstein. He makes a good point. Simple laws are better, and that's what God gave Moses. Complex laws contain all kinds of carve-outs and handouts for lobbyists, which moves power to them. The author of the book actually shows a simple two-dimensional graph with a bell curve. He uses the number of lawyers on the x-axis. You could also use number of laws. Lawyers are those who keep the laws, okay? Production is the vertical y-axis. With no laws, production is low. People don't want to produce something if the state won't defend their private ownership of it. Now, as the number of protective laws increases, people are more productive. But, much like the Laffer curve, production tops out, then starts to dwindle as the number of laws and lawyers increases. See, in America, we're clearly on the backside of the bell curve, where each law and each lawyer we add decreases gross domestic product. This overly constrictive legal environment is not only a violation of justice, it also throws the economy out of whack. Labor spent investigating meaningless violations of finicky laws is not a good use of labor. The investigator would create more value for society by doing something else that creates more value. And money paid in bribes increases the cost of doing business and creates inflationary pressure for consumers. Biblical economic policy. Sergei Seidamatov and I wrote the book by this title because we searched the landscape of the Christian economic literature and we couldn't find evidence of anyone doing a systematic theology of the subject. Yep, there are many of these, but I tend to like the one by Wayne Grudem. Instead of just pulling out one verse like whose face is on the coin, systematic theology attempts to look at the entire Bible and categorize the many teachings into a few basic concepts. Again, God gave Moses only 10 rules. So my fellow author and I followed that pattern and we produced what we called 10 biblical commandments of economics. Oh, the one that has the best application to today's subject is our number 10, which reads, honor those in power. We are biblically commanded to do this. But the assumption is that the laws are rooted in some form of justice. As the laws become more complex, they create more space for corruption. Anarcho-Tyranny. Yeah, that's a mouthful. In an article in the Epoch Times recently, Jeffrey Tucker explained the phrase anarcho-tyranny. Okay, anarchy is the absence of any government, and tyranny is a totalitarian government. So anarcho-tyranny is arbitrary law as the normal way of conducting public life. No one can count on any rules. Everything is fluid and constantly changing. There's only one feature we can expect. Whatever happens, it will be compulsory. That is, backed by the threat of violence. It's when an unruly mob uses their power to take over the rule of law. They may not enforce desecration of pregnancy support centers, but they'll actively go after parents who speak out at school board meetings. There are, according to them, good mobs. You're welcome to think about the Summer of Love riots in 2020. And there are bad mobs, like the Canadian truckers of recent. There is no free market, no free speech, no freedom of religion. Only markets, speech, and religion that coincides with the normative whims of the mob that day. So selling cigarettes might not be okay, but selling marijuana might be. Shouting down Clarence Thomas might be okay, but disagreeing with Randy Weingarten might not be. Buddhism might be admired, but Christianity is denounced as your grandpa's religion. These standards that change with the wind are quite dangerous. Now, let me quote Mr. Tucker from the article in the Epoch Times. Quote, "The phrase anarcho-tyranny is the opposite of what America was founded to be. We had a Republican form of government that established strict limits on government power. The people would be in charge through their elected representatives," end quote. During the Obama administration, I was astounded to hear the president feeling degraded because he had to follow that old rule of the debt ceiling. He honestly thought that every government expenditure was so important that there should be no controls on spending. But that denies the fallen nature of humans and would destroy a national economy. Without a debt ceiling, why would the government ever stop spending? I mean, what salary level for a bureaucrat would be too high? It would never end. So in a fallen world, we have to have control systems. And to suggest the absence of a debt ceiling is just ludicrous. But now the Biden administration is hinting at it again. Although when President Biden was a senator, he voted against raising the debt ceiling. The Fed wants more rules. A report summing up the Silicon Valley Bank failure states, quote, "The Fed's regulatory framework is quite complicated. Silicon Valley Bank and bank supervisors spent considerable effort seeking to understand the rules and when they apply, including the implications of different evaluation criteria, historical and prospective transition periods, cliff effects, and complicated definitions." Wow, end quote. And Silicon Valley Bank regularly engaged consultants to help them solve these problems. And it didn't work, by the way. An article in the Wall Street Journal titled, quote, "The Fed failed but wants more power," end quote, points out that Silicon Valley Bank seems to have been more focused on complying with financial regulation than prudently managing its balance sheet risks at the bank. But the article quotes Fed officials saying all they need to prevent future bank failures is, wait for it, more power. Economic measures. In the economics textbook I use at Dallas Baptist University, a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of shrinking GDP. We had that condition in 2021, but it was never declared a recession because they just changed the rules. Okay, so if they're going to change the rules on that measure, what else will they change? We really have fallen down this Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole where down is up and up is down. The Mad Hatter is giving directions with the famous phrase, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there." It seems to be true of this group. They continue to move the goalposts when it's convenient for them. Example, the Inflation Reduction Act that increased spending. It increased inflation, as even my sophomores at Dallas Baptist University understand. Prosecutorial discretion. Oh man, that's a mouthful, isn't it? A friend who is a former county prosecutor described what I'm talking about as prosecutorial discretion. That means when there are too many laws to be enforced, the prosecutor can decide which ones to enforce. The problem is that power was never granted to him or her. Here's an example. According to the Biden administration, illegal crossings of the southern border are down 90%. How can that be? Well, because they renamed the event. Illegal immigrants are now termed undocumented. Yeah. Try walking into the Supreme Court and identifying yourself as an undocumented Supreme Court judge, or apply for a job with a resume that says you are an undocumented graduate of Dallas Baptist University. Yeah, speaking of choosing which laws to apply, here's a thought experiment for you. Go visit the registrar at the University of Texas in Austin and ask how many undocumented students are studying there. But before they go to look up the number, explain your question is this: how many students are working toward degrees who have not registered with you, the registrar? And I'm thinking the number is somewhere near 0. So here we go. You can cross the border undocumented, but you can't study at the University of Texas without being documented by the registrar. You see, when you destroy the documentation system, everything goes backwards. Think about that piece of linen in your wallet or purse. Yes, US dollars are made of linen, not paper. Trying to pass a $1 bill as a 10 will get you laughed out of the store or arrested because they'll use their discretion to prosecute that law. But they will ignore money laundering by the Biden family where, quote, 10% gets paid to the big guy. Okay. In my little book titled Economics and the Christian Worldview, I wrote a section titled No Utopia. It also became the title of podcast number 34 by that same title. Look, we know we can't make perfect rules, but these folks keep writing more complex rules. It's clearly better for the economy to have simple rules for a complex world. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time. For more information, please visit us online at davearnott.com. If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.